Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm Queen of Washington. I'm the Community Relations Director for the City of New York. Mayor Bracy will be here shortly. We're going to get things started, and she will definitely be here. I just again want to say thank you for coming. This is very important for all of us to be here to share this information with our community. I was in the community sharing some of this information this week and last week, and a lot of the community are misinformed, and they're not clear on what they need, how to get it, and things of that sort. So it's great that we are all here to share this information. I just want to welcome today Press Secretary for the Department of State, Ron Ruman. He's going to start off with sharing some information. We do have information table up here for you to take information back on the voter ID law. There's voter registration forms and other informational activities in the community. So without further ado, thank you for coming, Ron.
All right, thank you very much. And good morning. Thanks to everybody for getting up nice and early on a Saturday. Come out. I'm going to go ahead and pass these around. This basically gives you the basic information about the law, or about, well, this is, yeah, basic information about the law, specifically about what IDs are acceptable, which is really two major points I want to go over today, and really get the correct information out there, because we've also run into situations where there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think it's causing a lot of unnecessary concern among people about whether they're going to be able to vote or what they have to do to be able to get an acceptable ID to vote. So first off, I just want to go over what are IDs that folks can use to vote this November. It has to be a photo ID that's issued by basically the government. It's any photo ID issued by the federal government or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It has to have your picture on it, your name, of course issued by the government, and it has to have an expiration date. That's important. It has to have an expiration date, and it must be not expired. Now, one of the probably the most common ID that people will use are Pennsylvania driver's licenses or non-driver photo IDs, which PennDOT issues. Those particular IDs, as is mentioned on the sheet here, that those IDs, the driver's licenses or the non-driver photo IDs, are usable to vote for up to 12 months past their expiration date. So if you have a driver's license, if you, for whatever reason, you or someone you know stopped driving in May, their license expired in May, they didn't renew it, they can use that to vote this November. And that is important. We've run into situations where in order to get, if you need a photo ID to vote, it is free. I mean, when you go to PennDOT, it is free. But in order to get that free ID, you must sign a piece of paper that says, I have no ID that I can use to vote. Okay? We've run into situations where folks who have had licenses that have expired over the past few months, they've gone into PennDOT and been told that they will have to pay $13.50 for the ID, which is what PennDOT normally charges for those things. And the reason is they have that expired license that's still good for them to vote. So if your license expired after November 6th of 2011, you can still use that to vote, and you won't be able to get a free ID until it's been expired for 1 year. Okay, so if you talk to other folks, please make sure they understand that. I've heard of several situations around the state where people have gone in and asked for the free IDs, and they had a license that was expired but had been expired for less than 12 months. So that's still an ID they can use to vote, and they can't get a free one. Also, a valid U.S. passport is usable to vote. A U.S. military ID, that's for active or retired. Now, there are some military IDs, particularly retired, that have an expiration date on it that says indefinite. That's okay, that's usable. But otherwise, it has to have an expiration date on it and not be expired. Employee IDs issued by the federal government, Pennsylvania, or a Pennsylvania county or municipality. Again, they have to have an expiration date. Photo IDs from accredited Pennsylvania public or private colleges, universities, or seminaries. Now again, when this law was passed in March, many Pennsylvania colleges did not have expiration dates on their IDs. Since that time, quite a number of schools have added expiration dates, and we've been working with them to encourage them to do that. One of the options we gave them is they could put a sticker on that card that had an expiration date, so they didn't have to print new cards for all of their students. A lot of schools have done that. Penn State is doing that, including all the branch campuses, including York. York College is doing that now, make their IDs usable. Temple, Pitts already were. The state system of higher education is making their IDs acceptable. So Shippensburg, Millersville, Westchester, Cheney, where we have a lot of students from around here that go, those IDs are all acceptable. So student IDs, if they have that expiration date, are from colleges. And also photo IDs can be issued by care facilities, nursing homes, personal care homes, and assisted living facilities. So if you know anyone that's in a nursing home or in one of those care homes or assisted living facilities, they don't have to go to PennDOT to get an ID. They can ask their facility to make one. All they need is the person's name, their photograph, the name of the institution, and an expiration date. And it doesn't have to be a laminated card like a driver's license. They can do it on a piece of paper, as long as it's got the facility on there and those other three things: the picture, the name, and the expiration date. We've recently heard that a number of care facilities are doing that around the state. We weren't sure. They're licensed not by the Department of State, either health, the welfare, or aging license them. So we've been trying to check, and we've been encouraged recently to hear that a number of those facilities are doing that. So if you know of any folks who live in those care facilities and they're concerned about getting to PennDOT, they don't have to. If you can work with them to get them to make that. Yeah.
Have you run across any facilities that refuse to do the expiration date?
I haven't heard of any. I can't honestly say there haven't been
It's
any.
not a law for them to do that.
It's not a law. No, they don't have to do that. They don't have to make the IDs at all. We would hope that most of them would if their residents asked them to do that. But I haven't heard of any that have said we're not going to do this. But there are several hundred of them, so it's possible. We would hope not. We would hope that they would want to do that for their residents. So those are the lists of IDs that are acceptable to vote, and they're on the card here. And I have, if anyone needs these cards, we have some of them up here. We also have them in Spanish, and these are here for you to take. We have some posters. We have posters in English right now, and we're getting Spanish posters hopefully in the next week or so. So I'll make sure that Edwina gets some to you for Spanish as well. If someone needs an ID and doesn't have one, there are essentially three different categories into which they might fall to get that ID. And all the IDs, if you're not in the care facility situation, you do have to go to the PennDOT Driver License Center to get them. In York County, the PennDOT Driver License Center is at 2130 South Queen Street. It's in that little shopping plaza there. If you ever had, or you know someone who ever had a Pennsylvania driver's license, or a non-driver photo ID for that matter, and it's expired for more than 12 months, they are on a fast track to get a new free ID. And this, we think, will help particularly a lot of senior citizens. You know, when my parents got elderly, at some point they stopped driving. Now they both kept their licenses just to have as IDs, but a lot of folks let them expire. So let's say you have someone that stopped driving 10 years ago. When they go to PennDOT, they just need to give the customer service person there their name and their date of birth. They're still in the system. PennDOT has told us that if your license expired from 1990 or later, you are definitely in the system. If it expired before that, you might be, but they're not 100% sure. That probably covers most folks at this time because that's going back 22 years. But if you had that license and it's expired, when you go to PennDOT, give them your name, give them your birth date, they'll find your information in their system. That person doesn't need to provide any proof of identification or residence or anything because they already did that to PennDOT when they got their license. So if you've had a license and it's expired, you go in, you give them your name, your birth date, they'll find you. I think they may ask for your social security number. They'll update your address if need be. You sign the paper that says I have no ID I can use for voting. They'll take your picture, you go home. So that's important, especially for older folks. They stop driving at some point, and they don't need the license. They don't have to have it. If they pitch the license, that's okay. You don't need that license. If you are a Pennsylvania native and you never had a driver's license here, what you need to do is, at PennDOT, you'll need a Social Security card 2 proofs of residence. That would be a utility bill, tax bill, a lease, a deed, subscription to a newspaper, magazine, that kind of thing. Something that's like an official piece of correspondence that has your name and your address on it. You give that to the folks at PennDOT. What they are able to do is if you were born in Pennsylvania, you don't need to get a birth certificate. You may have heard earlier about problems people had getting birth certificates with that raised seal on it. If you were born here in Pennsylvania, you don't need that. PennDOT has set up a system with the Department of Health to verify that birth record electronically. Now, the only problem with this is you'll have to come back. They'll send that information to the Department of Health. Within about a week, they told us it could be up to 10 days. They think in most cases it will be about maybe a week or so. And they'll verify that information, and then you'll get a letter from PennDOT to tell you to come back. And they recommend you bring your other documents with you that you brought the first time. Come back in, they'll have the verification of your birth, they'll take your picture, and you'll get your ID. Sir?
What if you were born, I've run across some issues especially from South Carolina. Some of the older people didn't have birth certificates.
Right, that's the next group. So that was Pennsylvania natives. Okay, if you were born here, that's what will happen. You'll get a PennDOT ID. Okay, if you were born outside of Pennsylvania, and we ran into this situation as well as we began implementing this law last spring, we did run across a small group of people who, as you mentioned, were born in other states, and in some cases in other countries. And because PennDOT requires a birth certificate, the Social Security card, and 2 proofs of residence to get their IDs, because it's the post 9/11 world. And that's really what this is all about. That's why they have all those security measures to get those IDs you have to prove who you are. We ran into a situation where folks who were born outside of Pennsylvania truly couldn't get a birth certificate. Sometimes they didn't have one, never had one, they didn't get one, or they can't get it anymore, it doesn't exist. So what we did, starting on August 27th, PennDOT began issuing what is known as a Pennsylvania Department of State voter ID card. This is a card that is for voting purposes only, and it says that right on the card. Because the other IDs, the PennDOT IDs, are IDs for anything. If you need to cash a check, if you need to go to the doctor, I know when I go to the doctor now, they want to see my ID. If you need sometimes to buy certain medicine over the counter, you need an ID. Those IDs are good for anything. These IDs are for voting only. And what you need to show, you still go to PennDOT, what you need then is you need you tell them, they'll go through this whole process. They'll ask you tell them you need an ID for voting. They're going to ask you for all these different things. Well, at some point you're saying, look, I can't get a birth certificate. I was born in South Carolina. I called down there. They don't have one. They'll give you a piece of paper to sign that says, I can't get the documents I need to get a PennDOT ID. What you need to get the Department of State voter ID is your Social Security number. You don't need the card. You need your Social Security number and 2 proofs of residence. The other documents I mentioned. And you do need to be, this is very important, when you go in to get, if you're going to get this Department of State ID, you need to be a registered voter. Because these cards are for voting purposes only. They will, at PennDOT, they will check with the Department of State to see if you're registered to vote. So make sure that if you have someone that's in this situation, get them registered to vote first. And I recommend the folks to give it about a week if you can. When that registration goes to the county, then there's someone at the county will enter that. Essentially, when it's entered, it goes to the state system and it's there. But if you take it in today, they may be busy doing other things. It may be tomorrow or the next day till they get that entered. We have had a few folks who registered to vote in the morning and gone to PennDOT in the afternoon. They're not in the system yet. So it's been a little bit of cause of frustration. Typically, we're told within 2 days you should be in the system. I don't trust systems. I'd give it a week. but that is important because this is a voting card only. Get them registered to vote first.
Okay.
But for someone in your situation, they need the Social Security number and 2 proofs of residence. Make sure they're registered to vote. They'll sign 2 pieces of paper. One says I can't get all the documents I need to get a PennDOT ID, and the other one says I have no other ID I can use to vote. Which is the document when they sign that makes the ID free. whether it's PennDOT ID or the Department of State voter ID. By signing that, it's called an affirmation, saying I have no other ID I can use to vote. And that makes it free. Okay, so they'll sign those two pieces of paper, they'll get their picture taken, and they'll go home with their ID. So those are essentially the three different scenarios folks would be in if they need to get an ID. Again, voter registration closes October 9th for this election. So make sure folks are registered to vote, but you'll have that period between October 9th and Election Day to get IDs. You can get an ID on Election Day and vote. So, you do need to take for the Department of State ID, you need to get them registered first. The other ones, you can go ahead and get that ID and then go register afterwards if need be. But the registration ends first. It ends October 9th. The IDs you can get right up to and including Election Day. So those are really the three scenarios that folks would face if they're going to get an ID. Based on what we've heard over the months from PennDOT, if you're going to go there, or I think most of the folks here are going to maybe helping other folks get them, try and make sure that they do have the right documents. Sometimes folks have shown up with little or no documentation, have asked for a free ID, and they've basically been told, well, we can't give it to you, you don't have the documents you need to get it. That causes obviously frustration and anger on the part of the people that are there. It gets everybody upset. But these are IDs that are going to be used to say this is who I am. And in the case of the PennDOT, these IDs for anything. So PennDOT has their policies and their rules because of the world in which we live, that you've got to have these documents to back up your claim of you are who you say you are to get those IDs. And that is basically the scenarios that folks would face when going to get these IDs, and you have the list of IDs that people can use. One other option does exist for people as well, because we've heard, and I'm sure you deal with folks that have mobility issues, and we've heard it's hard to get to PennDOT. I know PennDOT's not around the corner. In many cases, the voting booth isn't necessarily around the corner either. Now, it's closer than PennDOT in most cases, I realize that, but if folks need rides to the polls, then I would hope and encourage whoever is dealing with getting people to vote, offer to get them to PennDOT too. I've met with a number of groups where there were clergy represented. Maybe there's some clergy here, I don't know. I think church groups are good to do that. Other civic groups, friends and neighbors. If any of us know folks that live nearby that might need a ride to PennDOT, offer to do that. I think the political parties are doing that. I would think they are. I mean, if they have people that they think are going to want to vote and they hope they might vote for their candidate, they're going to want to make sure they're able to vote. So if any of you are active with the political party, encourage them to do that.
Is there a charge for the voter ID only?
No.
No charge.
No. As long as you go in there and you sign, what you have to do at some point is tell PennDOT, I don't have any other ID I can use to vote. They'll give you a piece of paper that you sign that says that. And once you do that, then it's free. Either one of them is free. So, I realize that it's not the simplest thing in the world always to get to PennDOT. But I would just point out that if you're getting a PennDOT ID, you only need to go to PennDOT once every 5 years. Because the IDs are good for, as far as voting goes, the IDs are good for 4 years, like a driver's license, and then 12 months after that to vote. If you get the Department of State ID, they're good for 10 years. So you only have to go once every 10 years to PennDOT. But I do recognize for some folks that's tough. The other option is an absentee ballot. Now, absentee ballots are not, you can't just say I want an absentee ballot. You can only get an absentee ballot in Pennsylvania if you're going to be out of the municipality where you live on that day, or you have an issue of physically being able to get to the polls. And I've told folks that if someone is in a situation where they don't drive there for whatever reason, either because of age or disability or other physical challenge, that it is very, very difficult for them to get to PennDOT, then that same obstacle exists for them to get to the polls. And even if they're an elderly person, this is a presidential election year. We may have lines at many voting polls. That's not uncommon. So if someone's older and they may have to go to vote and stand in line for 20 minutes or 25 minutes, that may be tough. I think if someone is truly physically challenged just because of lack of transportation, age, other disability or mobility issues, to get to PennDOT to get an ID, that situation exists to get to the polls as well. I think if you put that on your absentee ballot application, I would believe the County Board of Elections is going to give you an absentee ballot. Now, I wouldn't encourage anyone to do that just because they don't want to go to PennDOT to get an ID, even though I understand it can be a pain in the neck. I mean, this is an official document. You shouldn't be less than truthful. But someone who truly has that challenge to get there, I believe is a valid option is the absentee ballot. The absentee ballot applications have changed a little bit this year. You do have to put either your driver's license number or the last 4 digits of your social security number on there. Then they'll check with your voter record to see that you match. But then you'll get the absentee ballot. So that is an option that exists. Again, I would encourage no one to use it in a way that's not honest, but someone that really, it's going to be a terrible thing for them to have to get to PennDOT. That situation, again, essentially exists for going to the polls. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, if we have a voter whose address is incorrect on their license, what steps do they have to take to be able to vote?
The incorrect address on their license will not prevent them from voting. Okay. The law states that the photo should match and the name needs to substantially conform, and I'll talk about that in a moment or two, but actually the address is not something that is looked at in the law. Now, if their address is different, I would encourage them to update that, because they could be questioned by the poll worker. Poll workers have had the ability and in fact the obligation for forever to make sure that person who they were supposed to be, and that occasionally happens. So I would encourage them to get that updated at PennDOT when they can. Yes, ma'am.
The last election we had, I came across that. I had my change of address, but I had my yellow card with me.
Yeah.
They had to correct that.
Yeah, if you have your yellow card, you should be fine. They can give you. So if you're in the middle, if your license is good for another 2 years, you can get a change card, and that's free. So that way you have that, and you can show them. You don't have to get a whole new license yet.
In answer to her question, we were registering voters, and those that I would ask them if everything is the same. If their address was different, okay, there's a spot on your voter registration for a change of address.
Right.
And we encourage them to change their voter change their address on
yes.
voter registration.
And that's absolutely the right thing to do. They should.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've run into situations where folks have had different names on these documents, and they've said, well, that's just what I've used. That's not a good idea. I mean, sooner or later, that's going to cause you a problem for more than just voting. So if someone, for whatever reason, has a name change on one document, we would encourage you to get that changed on all of them.
There's one more question.
Yeah, no, that's
it says that, in other words, we're practically forced to get a voter ID.
if you want to vote. Yes.
Yeah, if you want to vote.
That's right.
But it says for free. Now, my question is, some of the people in the outlying areas, if they incur expenses, how do they recoup?
Well,
that is free.
to get the PennDOT, the expenses are not covered. So that's up to them to get to
You follow
PennDOT.
my line of thinking?
Pardon me?
You follow my line of thinking?
I do, but that was not we, as an executive agency, we administer the law, so we basically have to follow what the law says, and it only addressed the issue of the actual IDs, that there would be no cost for them. But getting to PennDOT is something that someone will have to do. Again, hopefully there might be someone that can take them. The shared ride program, for which there is a cost, you can use that if anyone's familiar with that. That a lot of folks use that to go to the doctor, other places. They'll come and pick you up. The little paratransit vans pick you up, take you where you go, bring you back. But that part of it is not reimbursed. Mayor, do you want to say a few words at all?
Thank you for being here. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. This is important information, as you've heard for the last 20 minutes. And we need to make sure it gets out into our community. That's the most important thing. You all represent various organizations, various groups, and it's important that folks know they can vote and how they can vote. So I thank you all for being here. Thank you to the organizers as well. And thank you all for coming out. We need to make sure everyone has the opportunity to vote in this election. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Ron, I have a question. Sure. What if on election day I get to the polls and I realize I don't have my ID on me? Will I still be able to vote?
Everyone will be able to vote on election day. If you're in the situation that Otto mentioned, you show up and you forgot your ID, you can cast what's called a provisional ballot. You'll vote by that, they'll put it in a little envelope and they'll send it off to the county election board. You'll then have 6 days after the election. And this year that will be until the Tuesday after the election, because unfortunately the law says 6 days, it doesn't say 6 business days, so the weekends are in there. But the Monday after election day this year is Veterans Day, so that doesn't count. So you'll basically have till the following Tuesday to get a copy of your ID to the county election office. You can take it in, you can mail it in, you can fax it in, or you can scan it and email it in. So you would have 6 days. So you would not be turned away to vote. Even if you didn't get an ID, you can still vote by provisional ballot. And if you can get that ID, if you can get to PennDOT and get that ID and get it to the county board within 6 days, that vote will count. So hopefully everyone will have it by then, but if for whatever reason somebody doesn't, they would still have that window between then and the next Tuesday to get an ID and get it there.
You had mentioned before about the expiration date on the IDs. Say I'm a Vietnam veteran, of course, you know, I'm no longer in active duty or active service, and the military ID has an expired date on it.
Mm-hmm.
Will I still be allowed to use that
No,
for identification?
no. Any ID you have has to have an expiration date, and it has to be not expired. So if you have an expiration date that said, 1975 from Vietnam, or if you were a college student and you have a date and it expired last May, you can't use that. The only ones you can use after their expiration dates are driver's licenses or non-driver photo IDs. You can use them for up to 12 months. Yes.
Are you able to speak on how to become a poll watcher?
No, I'm honestly not all that familiar with that. So I would talk to the county election office about that.
Okay, thank you.
Ron, earlier you had used the term substantially conform. You might elaborate on what that actually means.
That was actually my next point. Great minds. That is an issue that we have also come across where there's been a lot of confusion and I think a lot of misinformation. And I'm sorry to say, I think some of it is deliberate misinformation. The law says that the name on your ID must substantially conform to the name on the voter record. It doesn't have to match exactly. So if you have a nickname on one of them, if you registered to vote as William Smith and your driver's license says Bill Smith, that's okay. That substantially conforms. You'll be able to vote. And we have sent this information to county election directors. They have a conference every year. It was in State College 3 weeks ago. We had folks from our Bureau of Elections there all week. Secretary of our department, Carol H. will address the county election folks about voter ID. And we specifically spent time going over this issue of substantially conform. So a name like that is fine. If you have a middle initial on one or a middle name, a lady that I talked to a couple weeks ago, on one of them, her name is Mary Ann, it's all one word, and the other one it's Mary Ann, 2 words. That's okay. You'll be able to vote. Even if you have some folks on one of them actually a woman who works at the Department of State, her name is Anna Nicole. Well, she goes by Nicole. Her voter reg is Anna N. Smith. Her driver's license is A. Nicole Smith. That's okay. That'll work because it substantially conforms. Your picture matches. In that case, though, we've told the election folks, use common sense. The picture matches. The name's pretty much the same. In that case, you can look. The address is the same. The address isn't addressed in the law, but again, you look at all that other stuff. Everything's the same. The name's a little bit different. You're okay. It's okay to vote. So that's important. Please let folks know that. If they have, some folks may have gotten a letter from the Department of State over the summer. What we did, the only way we could identify any group of people that might not have IDs was to match PennDOT's database, people that have PennDOT IDs, with our voter registration database. And these are 2 massive databases, each with several million names in them. They were set up by two different departments for two completely different reasons. They don't match exactly because the names on the two aren't always the same. So we ended up with 759,000 registered voters who showed up as not having PennDOT IDs. We knew many of them did, and we've certainly heard from folks, but we said we're going to send letters to all of them because we don't know who does and who doesn't. A lot of those people, a lot of them, we heard from, and there were a lot of news stories about the fact they did have IDs, but because the name was different on one, State Rep Eugene D. Pasquale represents the city of York, got one because his name is Eugene Antonio on one and Eugene Anthony on the other. I can assure you, Eugene's going to vote in November. So please let folks know that if they have a license or they have a student ID or a military ID or whatever, and they're concerned, well, gee, I don't have my middle initial on this. That's okay. They'll be able to vote. I've had folks say, well, I'm telling these people they have to go in and re-register or go in and get a new license. They don't. They'll be able to vote.
What kind of discretion do the poll judges have? Some of these municipalities are very, very small and everybody knows everybody. Are they required to, even someone they know who shows up without an ID, that they have to say, sorry, Fred, next door neighbor, can't vote?
Well, according to the law, yes. That's what the law says. So if they're going to follow the law, and we encourage them to do that. In fact, when they take that job, they basically take an oath to follow the law. They should require that ID. I mean, that certainly is the situation in many places, and we have heard from folks about that. Unfortunately, it's not the situation in every case. And in Pennsylvania and elsewhere, there are situations where folks try to do things they shouldn't do concerning politics and elections. We know that.
Well, aren't but most of them concerning the absentee ballots, which have minimal, that's a very minimal requirement to document. That seems very odd that minimal is required for that, but if you show up in person and write your name down, it's maximum.
There have been certainly instances of absentee ballot fraud in Pennsylvania, but there have also been instances, and and come to get into the politics of it, but it's part of it. It's very difficult right now to prove any kind of voter fraud because other than the fact if you know that poll worker, there's really no reliable way to verify that you are who you say you are. People move around a lot. A lot of polls are very large. I live in West Manchester Township. There are 1,800 people who vote at my poll. I've lived there 12 years. I can tell you, I don't know any of the folks that work there. I don't happen to know them. I see them twice a year for 45 seconds. So you go in, you say, I'm Ron Ruman, okay, sign your name. That's all we have. We have had instances in the recent past in Pennsylvania of people and groups fraudulently registering voters. Once you fraudulently register someone, you know who that person is that you fraudulently registered, and without the photo ID, you could have essentially anyone go in and vote for that person. But anyway, that is the law. Hopefully everyone will follow it.
Two things. I had heard that with the absentee ballot that it was a requirement to send in a picture of your ID. Is that true?
No, you can do that. You can send a copy of your ID, but there are three options. You can send a copy of your photo ID, or you can put on there's a line that says your driver's license number or the last 4 digits of your social security number. Mm-hmm. They'll match that to the voter record, yes. It's not a perfect system there, but at least there's something that you need to do that indicates this is who I am when you send it in. So,
my other question was, when it comes down to the wire, the poll worker is going to be the deciding factor in whether you vote?
Well, a poll worker will decide whether they consider you to be the person that is on that voter roll. Now, if there's a question by the actual poll worker, you can take it or they can take it to the judge of elections. In each precinct, there's a judge of elections who's working there. And under Pennsylvania law, as it has been for many years, that person essentially will decide if you are the person qualified to vote. And that situation has happened before. We've had a law for about 10 years where first-time voters or voters casting a ballot for the first time at a poll, if you've moved, had to show ID. It wasn't a photo ID, but you had to show ID. It could have been a utility bill or anything. There were situations there where we probably had the same, because the law was the same, that the name had to substantially conform. I'm sure there were instances where the name on your electric bill wasn't the same as it was on your voter record, and that poll worker had to decide, okay, that's good. This law has been and remains the subject of at least one lawsuit, I think more than one. The election director from Allegheny County, who opposed this law, testified in the court that a few years ago when he went to vote, he was challenged by the poll worker because she didn't think his signature matched the signature that was on the book. You know how he resolved that? He took out his driver's license. But so that could have been a situation again. But however, even if they say no, you're not the person, you can still vote by provisional ballot. And then you can make your case to the county election board for whatever the reason is. They said we don't think you should be voting here. You can, to the county election board, which are this year the county commissioners. You can say, hey, I should have been able to vote, and you make your case. And then they're actually that county election board is actually the final word on that. But that's been the way it's always been here. Yeah.
How about hyphenated last names?
Hyphenated, if the hyphen's not there or one of the names isn't there, we've told the election workers, and we can't mandate it to them, but we have recommended that we feel in our interpretation that's substantially conforming, because we've had that situation raised. If everything else is the same, there's one of the last names isn't there in the hyphenated, we've said that's okay. The photo
I
matches
know where she's coming from with that, because I have Hispanic people in my neighborhood, and I noticed that one family, they just got married this summer. So I asked them, I think your wife has to change her last name, re-register. And the husband said no, because she kept her last name. Is that something that's traditional in the Hispanic community, that the wife still carries her maiden name?
I don't know that, but you don't have to change your name when you get married. The key thing is, if you're going to change it on one document, change it on all of them. So if you changed it on your driver's license, change it on your voter reg. Or don't change it on either of them. The key thing is the consistency. The name on the ID has to match the name on the books. So if you're going to change it everywhere.
The reason we were talking about this is because the voter registration form says if you change your address or you change your name, you must re-register.
Right.
So.
Well, that's right. If you change your name. You don't have to change your name when you get married.
Same name. Okay.
She's fine. Yeah, there's no legal requirement, ladies, to change your name when you get married. That's entirely up to you.
Okay.
And your in-laws. But there's no legal requirement to change your name. But if you change it one place, change it everywhere. And I remember, I've been married 27 and a half years now, and I remember that could be a bit of a pain in the neck too, to change your name. Now, if you would get married, second, third weekend of October, and you change your driver's license, you're not going to be able to change your voter registration that time. So get something from PennDOT. Get that change card, bring your marriage license, something. Because if you show up then, if you have a license and you change that, you're not going to be able to change it. Once registration closes October 9th, you can't change that name. So that's one situation where I've heard from a few folks. What if you get married in that interim period? Get that change card. Who had the change card? PennDOT will give you, even if you don't want to get a new license, they'll send you a little card that says, I changed my name, got married. Again, that's where you can show the license, show the registration, the picture's going to match, the address is going to match. Again, we've said to the poll worker, obviously, that use common sense. This person's telling you I got married 2 weeks ago, here's my change card from PennDOT, or here's my marriage license. Use that. But in your situation, they didn't change their name, that's fine. They wouldn't have changed it anywhere. They're okay.
I understand I have to get a PennDOT ID to vote. States that would support you back. What is necessary?
If you're going to get a PennDOT ID, you need a birth certificate, a social security card, and 2 proofs of residence. Utility bill, tax bill, lease, newspaper subscription, magazine subscription has your name and your address on it. If you were you born in Pennsylvania?
I was born.
Okay, you don't actually need to get a birth certificate if you don't have one. Now, if you don't do that, you'll have to go to PennDOT twice. But what they'll do, Okay. Well, then you may want to get a birth certificate if you don't have one. Do you have one?
Birth certificate, yeah.
Okay. Social security card?
Yes.
Your good 2 proofs of residence. That's what you need. Go into PennDOT, give them the information. They'll ask you, you want to make sure you tell them, I don't have an ID I can use to vote.
I don't have a local ID.
What ID do you have?
I have from Texas. I'm just relocated.
Okay, then you'll need to get that. Unless you want to get a license between now and then.
Yeah, that's what I'm working. My license is still valid, so.
Okay, well
eventually
that's.
I will get Pennsylvania.
They'll ask you if do you have an ID I can use to vote, and you got to tell them that, or they should ask you, but I would tell them. I don't have an ID. I need an ID to vote. I don't have any ID I can use to vote. They'll give you a piece of paper and you'll sign that. It says I have no ID that I can use to vote. By signing that paper, then you get that ID for free. Did you have something like that?
No. Thank you.
Can you explain the felon law? If there's a felon, what I'm understanding, they can vote.
Felons cannot vote while they're serving their sentence. Okay, once they have completed their sentence, then they are eligible to vote.
They can vote. Okay.
Or if they're not outmate status, I believe they can also vote. Is that true? If they're in an outmate household?
I think so, because I think at that point legally they've completed their sentence, so they're yes.
I did. Just for those, if any of you encounter someone that needs to obtain a birth certificate, I know, like for me, I didn't realize it a few years back after I got married, it was a mix-up. We got the copy and never got the original with the raised seal. So I had the copy all these years and no one caught it. And I was born out of state, but it's very easy to obtain your birth certificate online. So if you're running across someone that's from out of state, they have computer access. You can go right online and just go right in your search engine and just Google birth certificates. And it'll give you a whole list of websites. And I sent mine and I got mine back. It was probably less than 6 weeks. I got my original birth certificate with the raised seal. It came in the mail. So it was very easy to obtain a birth certificate. So just kind of word of knowledge, if anyone comes to the registration booth with questions on how to, if they're having difficulties, it's really simple now to get it online.
Another question. I have students that this is their first time voting. I don't want them to experience anything that might deter them future voting. Did you speak on, I may have already spoke on what they possibly need if anything other than ID and being registered?
No, that's everyone's under this, and everyone's the same now. Before, if you were a first-time voter, you had to show ID. It didn't have to be a photo ID. Now everyone has to show the photo ID, so they need the same thing you do. Now, just to pick up on your point, that's true, but again, no one any longer needs a birth certificate. Okay, if you're a Pennsylvania native, you will have to go twice to PennDOT, but we can electronically verify it. If you were born elsewhere and you can't get it, or that form also says you can't get it without the payment of a fee. You can also sign that and you can get the Department of State voter ID card. Okay. And that's up to you. It's not a necessarily bad thing to have a birth certificate, but we've heard some states charge as much as $50 for them. Pennsylvania, it's 10, and actually, if you would ask for it and you tell them there you need it for voting, it's free in Pennsylvania. But we can't do anything about other states. But you're right, and so if you want to do that, I would encourage it. Although we're getting to the point now where if you don't have it and you're looking for another state, you're maybe running into a time issue. Okay, probably can still get it, but you have the option of doing the Department of State ID card at this point. So those are the two different options there.
And if I can add, the forms that Mr. Ruman is explaining, we do have several of them here today for individuals to take back if you need to make copies. That you can have.
Somebody's got a question?
Yes, this is a very informative meeting. Is there any way that someone from the state or you, we have a retiree group, and our attendance is anywhere from 60 to 100. Could someone be from the state come and speak on the voter ID law? We've had people come to speak, but it wasn't as precise as what you're doing now.
Yeah, we can talk afterwards. You let me know when and where, and if I can make it, I will. Or if not, or hopefully, maybe. How often do you meet?
Every third Tuesday.
Okay, third Tuesday. All right. Well, we'll get together. We'll see when and where. And if I can make it, I will. Or if I can find someone else to do it, I will.
Thank you.
We've done a lot of these. We're trying to get the word out, and we started an ad campaign. We've had some on TV, not a lot. Starting next Monday, there'll be a lot more on TV. They'll have people on there holding up IDs, and they'll be saying, "Show it." And on October 1st, we'll be starting radio ads, and there'll be some internet ads. And we are also doing some transit ads. I don't think here. I think Philly, Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, maybe Allentown on the buses and stuff. And we'll be doing some targeted print advertising as well, particularly to African American publications, Hispanic publications, and college newspapers. So we hope to get the word out that way as well. Yes, ma'am.
When is the last day to register to vote?
October 9th.
Okay, so there's a last day to register to vote, but is there a date that PennDOT will say you have to come in to get your ID, or we can't guarantee that we'll get it to you in time to vote?
You can get your ID on election day and vote. Now, the only fly in the ointment there is if you're that group, I say you're a Pennsylvania native, and they're going to need to verify your birth certificate. That takes about a week and a half. But if you have an expired license, let's say, like the first group I mentioned, your license ran out 5-6 years ago, you never renewed it, or you're going to get the Department of State voter ID card, you can get that day. So if you get into PennDOT in the morning, you can get your ID, you can go vote. So there's no real date other than the one issue of if you're going to do the electronic verification, that probably takes about 10 days.
So another point, is PennDOT going to be set up for you to have like a separate line for you to just get the voter ID?
They don't have separate lines. The reason is, to be honest, there hasn't been an overwhelming number of folks coming to get these. Through this week, they've given out just a little over 7,000 since March, free IDs for voting purposes. So, like, PennDOT is issuing IDs all the time. They feel that they can deal with that in the normal course of things. And the other reason they said, if we do that, we don't have a lot of people coming in. So if the other people are sitting there waiting a half an hour for their thing and here's a line with nobody in it or one person in it, then the rest of those people are going to get upset. So you just kind of go into the normal flow with PennDOT at this point. We can't make PennDOT do that, but they've said, look, we haven't seen the numbers where they've been able to just work in with the normal flow of folks coming in to get a license, renew a license, do whatever else they're doing. Because PennDOT does, I guess one thing I should point out, PennDOT has been giving out non-driver photo IDs, which is essentially what you'll get. If you go in to get a PennDOT ID, it'll be what's called a non-driver photo ID. They've been giving those out for many years. In fact, I think they're about 1 million, which really surprised me. About 1 million people have those. And I know friends of ours have a friend who has one because she has seizures, so she can't drive, but she has that for an ID. So their feeling is, look, we're doing these anyway. We have been, so they're just be normal process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, listen, you folks have had great.
One more
Go ahead,
question.
please. Yeah.
One quick question. After this meeting, if we have any questions regarding the voter ID law, is there an 800 number or something that
There
we can
is.
call?
Yes, and there are 2 places to go to get more information, and I would encourage you to do that if you have questions that do come up later, or you talk to other groups or folks that have questions. There's a website. It's votespa.com, and that's they're on the sheets, the little handouts that you have. So
don't have any questions, but I would like to make just 2 quick.
Okay, one more. Just there's the website votespa.com, and there is a toll-free number, which is 1-877-VOTES-PA, which is 1-877-868-3772. So there's a toll-free number and a website, and you can call the mayor's office as well, and they'll help you out. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's okay.
I just want to applaud the mayor for her efforts in bringing this
I do too.
effort together, and I know she's been working on this. And I want to thank you too, and I agree with Mr. Carter. The presentation was very good.
Thank you.
I would just encourage all of us as residents of this community to get this word down to 18-year-olds, 19 years old, people just getting out of high school, because that's an important segment voting block as well. And so I just want to thank everyone, and Mayor, thank you.
And I want to echo that. We had a news conference a couple of weeks ago that the mayor set up that I attended, and Representative DePasquale was there. And I said then, and I say it now, that Governor Corbett and Secretary Achel are very grateful for the work that the mayor and the other folks here have done, because our goal, and I was there when the governor signed the bill in March, said, okay, your job is to make sure people, the Department of State's job is to make sure people who want to vote can get IDs. And we've taken that very seriously. We want everybody who wants to vote to be able to vote. We can't do that on our own. We need people like Mayor Bracey and Representative DePasquale and you folks who are willing to get the message to the folks that we're not going to reach. We're not going to reach. We're not naive enough to think we're going to get the word to everybody. We're going to try. We're going to do these meetings, and I can't tell you how many Otto works with a group that we've hired to help us do this, and they've been doing a tremendous job. We have done probably a couple of hundred of these meetings across the state. And of course, I'm talking to 25 or 30 of you. I hope each of you is going to talk to 25 or 30 people. We're going to do this ad campaign. We think we're going to reach just about everybody, but we won't reach everybody. And that's where we need the help of you folks. And we couldn't do it without community leaders like the mayor. And this has been a very controversial law. I was a reporter for a decade. I've been in this side of the microphone and camera for the last 20 years. So I got 32 years. I've never seen an issue like this. And I hope to God I never see another one like this. But it really has been. And which in a way, it's been negative. It's been negative for me because I've taken a lot of the brunt of it being the press secretary. So I get all the media calls and every objection or every scenario or every whatever anybody has, and I'm getting the questions. But the other part of it tells me that it does matter to people that they're able to vote. And that's good. Unfortunately, we're going to be lucky if we get 60% of our registered voters out this fall. That's not good. I mean, that's typical. 2008, we got about 65%. That was the highest total since, I want to say, like 1972, 68, 72. So, maybe this will inspire some people. And if that happens, that's a good thing. But I want to thank all of you for being willing to come out on a Saturday morning and spend some time here. There are handouts here. There are handouts in English and Spanish. There are posters. If you want a couple of posters, take them. I know the mayor's office is going to take some. If you need some more, the mayor's office knows how to reach me. We have some handouts or some posters coming in Spanish. They're being printed now, so I'll get you some of those. So please take that, get the word out. And if you have any questions, go to that website or call that number, and we'll certainly try and answer them. If you have no other questions, thank you for coming.